Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back, way back, to a time when the simple act of knowing one was a monumental, painstaking endeavor. Imagine yourself, not with a glowing phone screen or a ticking watch on your wrist, but enveloped in the profound darkness of an ancient night. The only light might be a flickering oil lamp, casting dancing shadows that make the familiar corners of your dwelling seem alien and vast. Outside, the stars are a brilliant, overwhelming scatter, and the moon, if visible, charts its slow, silent course across the sky. You can feel time passing, but measuring it? That's an entirely different, and frankly, more frustrating beast. The sheer, relentless patience required to even begin to mark the passage of moments, let alone with precision, is something that, if we're being honest, you probably wouldn't survive. We're talking levels of tedium that would make watching paint dry feel like an action movie. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly helps this little corner of sleepy history keep going. And, as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always fascinating to see our global community of drowsy history buffs. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a world where the sun is your grandest clock, its daily journey from sunrise to sunset the most obvious division of your existence. You wake with its first light, perhaps, feeling the cool morning air on your skin, the scent of damp earth or the distant aroma of a neighbor's cooking fire. The position of the sun in the sky becomes your rough guide. Is it high overhead? Then it's midday, time for a brief respite if you're lucky, or the most intense period of labor if you're not. Is it dipping towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple? Then your workday is nearing its end, and preparations for the night must begin. This celestial rhythm is fundamental, deeply ingrained. You know the seasons by the sun's changing path, the subtle shifts in the length of daylight. For millennia, this was enough for many aspects of life. The planting of crops, the migration of herds, the general ebb and flow of communal activities, these could often be governed by these broad, natural strokes. A mainstream historical fact, of course, is that all early civilizations, from the Egyptians with their obelisks casting shadows to the builders of Stonehenge, used the sun, moon, and stars as their primary timekeepers. They were humanity's first, and for a long time, only, calendars and clocks. But what about the night? What about those long hours after the sun has vanished, when the world is transformed? Or what if the sky is shrouded in clouds for days on end, obscuring your celestial guide? What if you need to measure shorter intervals, specific durations for tasks that cannot wait for the sun to reach a certain point in its arc? Imagine you're a temple priest, needing to perform a ritual at a precise hour after sunset, or a healer, needing to administer a poultice that must steep for a specific, shorter period. The sun offers no immediate help here. This is where the human desire for more precise control, for a more granular understanding of time's passage, begins to stir. You start looking for other ways to mark these intervals. Perhaps you observe the predictable patterns of animals, the first crow of the rooster, as folk tradition often suggests, or even, as some fringe theories propose, the incredibly regular chirping of certain insects at specific temperatures, though proving that was used systematically is a different matter. It's a quirky tidbit that people have long tried to find natural metronomes, even if they weren't always reliable. You might even try counting, a simple one-elephant, two-elephant method, but how long can you keep that up accurately, especially if you're trying to, say, cook something that requires 30 minutes of simmering? Your mind wanders, you lose count, and dinner is ruined. A minor catastrophe, perhaps, but indicative of the larger problem. The need for something more dependable, more consistent, becomes pressing, especially as societies grow more complex. Agriculture demands timely planting and harvesting. Religious ceremonies require punctuality to appease the gods. Early forms of administration and governance, even in their most rudimentary stages, benefit from a shared understanding of when things should happen. Historians still argue whether the very first attempts at subdividing the day into smaller, manageable units were driven primarily by religious observance, agricultural necessity, or early bureaucratic needs. Each had its own compelling reasons for wanting to pin down the elusive nature of time. You feel the weight of this challenge. How do you capture something so intangible? How do you make the invisible visible, the unceasing flow somehow countable? The flickering flame of your lamp consumes its oil at a roughly steady rate, but roughly isn't good enough for many tasks. You might notice how long it takes for a certain amount of incense to burn down, its fragrant smoke a pleasant, if not entirely precise, marker. But incense sticks vary, and breezes can alter their burn rate. It's all a bit approximate. So, you are, in essence, adrift in a sea of unmeasured moments, especially once darkness falls. The night is a vast, undifferentiated expanse, and the desire to chart it, to break it into knowable segments, is a powerful one. It's not just about efficiency, it's about order, about understanding, about imposing a human framework on the natural world. You yearn for a device, any device, that can offer some consistency, some way to say, this much time has passed, with a degree of confidence. This yearning is the very seed from which innovation will sprout. It's this deep-seated need that will eventually lead creative minds to experiment with all sorts of ingenious, and sometimes downright bizarre, methods of timekeeping. And it's this quest that brings us, slowly but surely, towards the idea of using something as humble, as seemingly unpromising, as a stream of falling sand. But before sand could have its moment, another fluid element would have its day, and its own set of frustrating limitations. The journey to a reliable hourglass is paved with many a damp, and ultimately, sandy, misstep. And so, this yearning for a more reliable measure, something beyond the sun or your own unreliable internal rhythm, leads you and countless others across the ancient world to experiment. Before sand even enters the picture in a serious way, its more fluid cousin, water, seems like a promising candidate. After all, water flows, doesn't it? And if you can control that flow, perhaps you can measure time. This brings us to the age of the clepsydra, the water clock. A simple concept, really, water drips, or flows, from one vessel into another, and the amount of water accumulated, or the time it takes for one vessel to empty, marks a period. The ancient Egyptians and Greeks were certainly keen on these devices. It's a well-established historical fact that clepsydras were used in Athenian courts, for instance, to limit the speaking time of orators. Imagine a lawyer today being told their closing argument had to fit within the draining of one specific pot of water. Might make for shorter trials, if nothing else. You decide to build one. You find a suitable pottery vessel, perhaps, and carefully drill a small hole near the bottom. You fill it with water, and watch. Drip, drip, drip. It's working. Sort of. You soon discover that the water doesn't drip at a constant rate. When the vessel is full, the water pressure is higher, and the drips are faster, closer together. As the water level drops, the pressure decreases, and the flow slows down. Your hour marked at the beginning when the pot was full is significantly shorter than your hour marked towards the end. Not exactly the pinnacle of precision engineering, is it? This varying flow rate was the Achilles heel of early, simple outflow clepsydras. To get around this, ingenious minds developed more complex designs. Some involved keeping the main reservoir constantly full, with an overflow system, so the water entering the actual measuring part of the clock was always at the same pressure. Others were inflow clepsydras, where time was measured by the rising water level in a receiving container, which could be marked with gradations. These were better, but still, water, bless its life-giving heart, is a fickle mistress when it comes to timekeeping. You notice, for example, that on a cold night, your water clock seems to run slow. The water is more viscous, thicker, and it drips with a certain reluctance. On a warm day, it's sprightlier, flowing more freely, and your clock runs fast. So now, not only do you have to account for the changing water pressure, but you also have to somehow compensate for the ambient temperature. Some particularly elaborate water clocks, especially in later periods like in China or the Islamic world, incorporated quite complex mechanisms to try and regulate this, but for your simple, household or small workshop version, it's a headache. You might try to insulate it, or only use water from a deep well that maintains a relatively constant temperature, but these are all extra layers of fuss. Then there's the issue of evaporation. On a dry, breezy day, a not insignificant amount of your precious time-telling water might simply vanish into thin air, especially from the receiving vessel if it has a wide surface. It's like the universe is playing a tiny, frustrating prank on your efforts. And what about impurities? Even the clearest spring water contains some sediment. Over time, these tiny particles can begin to clog the small outflow hole, constricting the flow, making your clock run slower and slower until it eventually just stops, usually at the most inconvenient moment. You'd then have to painstakingly clean out the tiny orifice, probably with a sharpened twig or a fine needle, hoping you don't accidentally enlarge it and ruin your calibration. Remember that intricate incense clock we touched upon? Suddenly, it doesn't seem so finicky compared to a perpetually congested water clock. And the sheer maintenance. You have to keep refilling it. If it's a large clock designed to run for many hours, that's a lot of water to haul. And if it's an outflow clock, what do you do with all the water that's dripped out? Unless you have a clever system to recycle it, which means more complexity, it's just water. Everywhere. Leading to dampness, mold, and perhaps even attracting thirsty insects or small animals, who might not appreciate your scientific endeavors. One quirky tidbit you might stumble upon in your research into ancient timekeeping is the existence of clepsydras that incorporated little figurines or automata that would move or strike a bell at certain intervals, powered by the water flow. Imagine a tiny mechanical drummer emerging to tap out the hour, impressive, but also just another set of delicate parts that could get gummed up by sediment or corrosion. The more complex they became, the more points of failure they introduced. Scholars debate the exact moment when the inherent limitations of water clocks became a critical driver for seeking fundamentally different alternatives. Was it when astronomical observations demanded greater accuracy for charting celestial movements? Or perhaps when more complex industrial processes, like early metallurgy, required more precise timing for heating or cooling? Or was it simply the cumulative frustration of countless individuals like yourself, tired of their dripping, clogging, temperature-sensitive contraptions? It was likely a combination of all these pressures. You can just imagine the scene: an ancient artisan, let's call him Lin, hunched over his workbench, trying to time a delicate glazing process for his pottery. His water clock is acting up again. The hole is partially blocked, the temperature in the kiln shed has made the water flow erratic, and he's just about had enough. He looks around his workshop. His gaze falls upon a container of fine, dry sand he uses for polishing. He idly picks up a handful and lets it trickle through his fingers. It flows smoothly, consistently. A light bulb, or perhaps a well-tended oil lamp, goes on above his head. Sand doesn't freeze in winter, well, not in a way that affects its flow through a small hole. It doesn't evaporate. Its viscosity isn't significantly affected by normal temperature changes. It doesn't get thicker or thinner. And while it can have impurities, the right kind of sand might just flow more reliably than water. The idea starts to take root. Could this be it? Could this humble, everyday material be the key to a more stable, less aggravating way to measure the passing moments? The woes of water, its temperamental nature, its tendency to clog, its very wetness, have paved a path, a rather soggy one, towards considering a drier, more granular solution. The rise of sand as a timekeeping medium isn't just about finding something that flows. It's about finding something that flows predictably and with far fewer headaches. The era of constant damp and drip might just be drawing to a close, making way for the soft, steady whisper of falling grains. So, you've had your fill of water's fickle ways. The vision of sand, dry, consistent, and seemingly cooperative, dances in your mind. It seems so simple, doesn't it? Just pour some sand into a container with a hole, and let it run through. Easy. Or so you think. You quickly discover that making sand a reliable timekeeping medium presents its own unique, and surprisingly intricate, set of challenges. This is the sand conundrum. It promises simplicity but demands precision in ways you hadn't initially anticipated. Your first attempt might involve grabbing a handful of whatever sand is readily available, perhaps from a nearby riverbank or a construction site. You fashion a simple funnel, maybe from a rolled-up piece of stiff leather or a hollowed-out gourd, and pour your sand in. It starts to flow, and then it stops. Just like that. You tap the funnel. A little more sand trickles out, then it clogs again. You investigate. The sand grains are all different sizes. Some are coarse and jagged, others are finer, but they're all mixed together. The larger grains are getting stuck in the narrow opening, creating a little traffic jam, a miniature avalanche that blocks everything behind it. This isn't the smooth, continuous stream you envisioned. This is more like a frustrating series of tiny, sandy hiccups. You realize that the quality of the sand is paramount. It can't just be any old sand. It needs to be uniform. The grains should ideally be of a very similar size and shape. If they're too angular, they'll interlock and resist flow, like a poorly designed game of Tetris. If they're too fine, like dust, they might pack together too tightly or, conversely, flow too quickly and erratically, almost like a fluid, but without the predictability you're aiming for. You need a Goldilocks sand, not too coarse, not too fine, but just right. Then there's the issue of moisture. Even sand that appears dry to the touch can absorb ambient humidity from the air. And damp sand, as anyone who's tried to build a sandcastle near the tide line knows, clumps. It sticks together. It certainly doesn't flow freely through a small aperture. So, your timekeeping sand needs to be bone dry, and it needs to stay bone dry. This means you'll need to consider how to protect it from the environment, especially if your hourglass is going to be used in a place with fluctuating humidity. This problem of moisture is a persistent one. It's a well-known historical fact that early gunpowder, another granular substance requiring precise mixing and dry storage, suffered from similar issues with humidity affecting its performance. Controlling moisture was a big deal for many ancient technologies. And even if you get the grain size and dryness right, there's the static electricity. Yes, really. As those tiny grains rub against each other and against the sides of the container, they can generate a small static charge. This can cause them to cling to the sides of the hourglass, especially if the vessel is made of certain materials, or it can make the grains themselves repel or attract each other in unpredictable ways, disrupting the smooth flow. It's a quirky tidbit that even modern industries dealing with flowing powders and grains have to account for static electricity to prevent blockages or uneven distribution. It's not just a problem for your ancient hourglass, it's a persistent quirk of physics. Furthermore, the shape and smoothness of the inner surfaces of your hourglass vessel become critical. If the insides are rough or have any imperfections, grains of sand can catch on them, building up over time and subtly altering the flow rate. It's like the sediment problem in water clocks, but with a dry, scratchy twist. You need the internal passage to be as smooth as possible, encouraging the sand to glide rather than snag. Historians still argue whether the earliest sand clocks were even intended for precise timekeeping or were more like rough timers for specific tasks, where a few minutes of error here or there didn't matter much. Perhaps they were used for timing cooking, or short religious rituals, where a round about this long was good enough. The leap from a rough sand timer to a truly precise hourglass capable of accurately marking an hour, or a significant fraction thereof, was a substantial one, involving a lot of trial and error. It wasn't just a matter of finding a sand, but the sand, and then figuring out how to make it behave. You might experiment by sifting your collected sand through different meshes, perhaps fine cloth or woven reeds, to try and separate the grains by size. This is tedious work. You spend hours meticulously sifting, discarding the too large and too small particles, striving for that elusive uniformity. Then you might try drying your selected sand, perhaps by baking it gently over a low fire or spreading it out in the hot sun on a dry day, stirring it frequently. You're essentially becoming a sand connoisseur, developing a feel for its texture, its weight, its flow characteristics. You observe how different types of sand behave. Sand from the seashore, rounded by the waves, might flow differently than sharp, crystalline sand from a crushed rock source. You're also learning about the mechanics of granular flow. It's not as simple as water. With water, pressure is key. With sand, it's more about the interplay of friction between grains, the angle of repose, the steepest angle at which a pile of sand remains stable, and the avoidance of bridging, where particles lock together to form an arch over an opening, stopping the flow. You're inadvertently becoming an early physicist, studying the peculiar ballet of tiny particles. This isn't just about pouring sand into a hole anymore, it's about understanding the subtle forces at play. The dream of a simple, reliable sand clock is encountering the gritty reality of granular physics. The conundrum is clear. To achieve the desired simplicity in operation, you must first master a hidden complexity in preparation and design. The path to precisely timing sand flow is, ironically, paved with many an initial, frustrating blockage. Having wrestled with the initial, surprising blockages and inconsistencies of just any old sand, you now embark on a more focused, almost obsessive quest, the hunt for the perfect grains. You understand that the heart of a reliable hourglass lies not just in its construction, but in the very soul of its contents. The quality of the sand, its preparation, its very essence, will determine whether your device is a frustrating toy or a genuine instrument of time. This is where the artisan's touch, the alchemist's patience, and the scientist's meticulousness begin to merge. Your search takes you to different environments. You examine sand from riverbeds, noting its often mixed composition of silt, clay, and various grain sizes. You sift through desert sand, which can be wonderfully fine and rounded by the wind, but sometimes too fine, almost like dust, which, as you recall, can pack down or flow too erratically. You might even consider crushed materials, finely pulverized seashells, eggshells, or certain types of rock like marble or granite. A well-documented historical fact is that ancient Romans used crushed marble dust for various purposes, including in cements and as a fine abrasive. It stands to reason that similar ingenuity would be applied to finding or creating suitable grains for timekeeping if the need was strongly felt. Let's say you find a promising source, perhaps a particular type of rock that, when carefully crushed and ground, yields grains that are relatively uniform and have a good, rounded shape that discourages interlocking. The process of preparing this material is laborious. You might use a heavy stone mortar and pestle, patiently grinding the larger pieces down. The rhythmic thud and scrape become the soundtrack to your quest. You develop a feel for it, knowing just how much pressure to apply, how long to grind to achieve the desired consistency without turning it all into useless powder. It's an almost meditative process, requiring focus and a strong arm. You might even joke to yourself that you're not just grinding stones, you're grinding time itself into a usable form. Once you have a batch of roughly ground material, the sifting begins in earnest. You construct a series of sieves with increasingly fine meshes. Perhaps the first sieve is made of woven plant fibers, coarse enough to catch only the largest unwanted fragments. The next might be a piece of thin, stretched animal hide, perforated with carefully sized, regular holes, a painstaking task in itself, probably involving a heated metal point or a very sharp awl. Then, for the finest sifting, you might use silk. Silk, a prized commodity, was known for its strength and fineness, making it an ideal material for a high-quality sieve. The use of silk in various fine applications, from clothing to art, is well established in ancient China. You pour your ground material into the first sieve, shaking it gently, tapping its sides, watching the smaller particles fall through while the coarser ones remain. What passes through then goes to the next, finer sieve, and so on. Each stage refines your precious supply, narrowing down the range of particle sizes. It's a dusty, repetitive job. You probably wear a cloth over your nose and mouth to avoid inhaling the fine powder. Your hands become coated in a fine film of stone dust. But with each pass, the sand that accumulates beneath the finest sieve becomes more precious, more uniform, closer to your ideal. This isn't just cleaning, it's a rigorous process of selection and classification. After sifting, the sand must be washed. This might seem counterintuitive, given your concerns about moisture, but washing helps to remove any remaining ultrafine dust particles that might cling to the desired grains, and also to get rid of any organic matter or soluble impurities. You'd carefully rinse the sifted sand with clean water, perhaps several times, letting the cloudy water run off until it becomes clear. This process is somewhat akin to how gold panners wash away lighter dirt and gravel to reveal the heavier gold flakes. Then comes the critical drying process. This must be thorough. You spread the washed sand in thin layers on clean, flat surfaces, perhaps white clay dishes or smooth wooden boards, and place them in the sun on a hot, dry day. Or, more reliably, you might gently heat the sand over a controlled fire, stirring it constantly to ensure every grain is exposed to the heat and that no part of it gets scorched, which could alter its properties or color. You're looking for that moment when it flows like liquid silk through your fingers, with no hint of tackiness or clumping. A quirky tidbit from a slightly different field, ancient Egyptian brewers and bakers were masters of using controlled heat for drying grain for storage and malting, understanding that proper drying was crucial to prevent spoilage and ensure quality. The principles translate, even if the end product is rather less intoxicating. Once perfectly dry, some artisans might have even gone a step further. There's speculation, though direct evidence is scarce, that some hourglass sand was polished. This could involve tumbling the dried grains in a container with harder, smoother pebbles, or perhaps with leather scraps, to further round off any remaining sharp edges and make the surfaces of the grains themselves smoother, thus reducing intergrain friction. Historians still argue whether such meticulous, labor-intensive polishing techniques were commonly employed for hourglass sand or reserved for only the most expensive, high-precision instruments. It would certainly add another layer of dedication to the craft. You now have your precious, refined sand. It looks different from the stuff you started with. It has a consistent sparkle, a uniform texture. When you pour it, it cascades in a beautiful, almost liquid stream, with no hesitation, no clogging. It's a testament to your patience and skill. You might store it in a sealed clay jar, carefully protected from any dampness or contamination, like a rare spice. This carefully prepared sand is no longer just sand. It's the lifeblood of your future hourglass, the key to its accuracy. You've transformed a common, humble material through sheer effort and understanding into something specialized and valuable. The quest for the perfect grains has been long and dusty, but the reward is a medium that finally promises the steady, reliable flow you need to truly begin capturing time. With your meticulously prepared, almost alchemically refined sand now safely stored, your attention turns to the vessel itself, the body that will contain these perfect grains and guide their temporal descent. Crafting this container is not merely a matter of making something that holds sand, it's about creating a precisely shaped environment that facilitates and complements the sand's carefully engineered flow. The materials you choose and the techniques you employ will be just as critical as the sand itself. You are, in effect, building a tiny, controlled universe for your timekeeping medium. Initially, you might consider readily available materials. Pottery is a strong contender. Clay is abundant, malleable, and can be fired to create a hard, durable container. You could throw two identical bowl shapes on a potter's wheel, let them dry to a leather-hard state, and then join them at their rims, leaving a small opening for the sand to pass through. Or you could craft two cone-like shapes. The challenge with pottery, however, lies in achieving a perfectly smooth internal surface and a precisely sized, perfectly centered aperture. Any roughness inside, any slight imperfection in the glaze, if you even use one initially, could snag your precious grains. And getting that tiny hole just right, without cracks or irregularities after firing, is an art form in itself. Remember those water clocks and their tendency to clog? A rough ceramic neck could be just as problematic for sand. Wood is another possibility. A skilled woodturner could potentially create two hollow hemispheres or cones from a fine-grained, stable wood. These could then be joined. However, wood has its own issues. It can absorb moisture, even from the air, causing it to swell or shrink, which could subtly alter the dimensions of the critical neck area or even crack the vessel over time. It also needs to be sealed very effectively on the inside to present a smooth, non-porous surface to the sand and to prevent the wood itself from abrading or discoloring the grains. Perhaps a fine lacquer, like those famously used in Chinese decorative arts, could provide such a surface. The historical fact of advanced lacquerware in ancient China, known for its durability and smooth finish, certainly suggests the technology was available. Then there's metal. Bronze, for instance, could be cast. Creating a mold for two identical chambers joined by a narrow neck would be complex, but achievable for a skilled metalworker. Metal offers the advantage of durability and the potential for a very smooth internal finish if properly polished. However, metal can also corrode or tarnish over time, especially if the sand contains any residual moisture or impurities, or if certain types of metal react with the minerals in the sand. You'd also need to ensure the join between the two halves, if cast separately, was perfectly seamless on the inside. Any tiny ridge could disrupt the flow. But the material that holds the most promise, especially for later, more refined hourglasses, is glass. While the widespread production of high-quality, clear glass for everyday vessels was a later development in many parts of the world, rudimentary glassmaking existed in various ancient cultures, including China, though it wasn't as central as ceramics or bronze work in earlier periods. The beauty of glass is its smoothness, its inertness, it doesn't react with the sand, and, crucially, its transparency. Being able to see the sand flowing, to observe its level, is a significant advantage. Imagine the challenge for an early glassblower. To create two perfectly matched bulbs, connected by a narrow, uniform passage, all in one piece, is a feat of considerable skill. It requires precise control of heat, breath, and movement. The glassblower would gather molten glass on the end of a blowpipe, skillfully shaping and inflating it to form the first bulb. Then, with extraordinary dexterity, they would constrict the glass to form the narrow neck, and then inflate a second, matching bulb on the other side of that constriction. The entire process would have to be done relatively quickly, before the glass cooled too much and became unworkable. A quirky tidbit: some historians speculate that the earliest hourglass forms might not have been two distinct bulbs at all, but rather a single, elongated tube, wider at the ends and narrow in the middle, made perhaps by carefully heating and drawing out a section of a glass tube. This might have been an easier starting point for glassworkers still mastering the more complex double bulb form. Historians still argue whether the crucial innovation of making the hourglass from a single piece of glass, thus eliminating any internal seam at the neck, was a sudden breakthrough or a gradual refinement. A seamless internal passage is so vital for consistent flow that it's hard to imagine truly accurate hourglasses existing before this technique was mastered. If the two halves were made separately and then joined, even the most careful fusion or gluing would likely leave some minute internal ridge or imperfection at that critical juncture. So, you, our aspiring hourglass maker, might experiment. Perhaps your first attempts are with clay, and you struggle with the roughness and the difficulty of forming that perfect, tiny hole. You might then try wood, meticulously carving and smoothing, only to find it warps with the seasons. You hear tales of glass, or perhaps you see a rare, imported glass bead or small vessel, and you recognize its potential. The dream of a perfectly smooth, transparent container begins to take shape. You'd also need to consider how the hourglass will be supported. If it's a simple, unadorned pottery or wooden version, it might just be designed to sit on a flat surface. But more elaborate ones, especially those made of precious glass, would require a protective frame. This frame could be made of wood, metal, or even ivory, and might be ornately carved or decorated. The frame serves not only to protect the delicate glass but also to hold it securely in an upright position, ensuring the flow of sand is perfectly vertical. Any tilt would affect the flow rate. The construction of the vessel is a dance between material properties, available technology, and the unyielding demands of physics. Each choice, from the raw material to the method of shaping and finishing, has implications for the final performance of your hourglass. You're not just making a container, you're engineering a precision instrument with the tools and knowledge of your time. The quest for perfect grains was just the first half of the battle. Crafting the perfect home for those grains is the next essential step on the path to accurately timing their gentle fall. Now, with your meticulously prepared sand and your carefully considered vessel material, you arrive at what is arguably the most critical single component of the entire hourglass, the narrow passage, the tiny orifice, the neck through which every single grain of your precious sand must flow. This is the very heart of the hourglass's precision. If the vessel's bulbs are the lungs, and the sand is the breath, then the neck is the valve that controls the rhythm of life, or in this case, the rhythm of time. Get this wrong, and all your painstaking work on the sand and the overall structure will be for naught. The engineering challenge here is immense, especially with ancient tools and techniques. The diameter of this opening needs to be absolutely precise and perfectly uniform. Too wide, and your sand will rush through in a torrent, your carefully measured hour lasting perhaps only a few minutes. Too narrow, and the flow will be agonizingly slow, or worse, prone to the very clogging you worked so hard to avoid with your perfectly sifted sand. Remember those frustrating blockages with your initial, unrefined sand? A poorly made neck can recreate that nightmare even with the best grains. Consider the materials again. If you're working with pottery, drilling, or forming a perfectly round, smooth hole of a consistent, tiny diameter before firing, and ensuring it doesn't warp or crack during firing, is a masterclass in ceramic skill. One slight tremor of the hand, one impurity in the clay at that critical point, and the piece could be ruined. You might try forming the hole around a perfectly smooth, oiled twig or metal rod, which is then carefully removed before firing, but shrinkage during drying and firing adds another layer of unpredictability. If you're attempting this with wood, carving out such a fine, consistent bore is incredibly difficult. Wood grain can splinter, and the tools available might not be fine enough for the precision required. You'd need specialized drill bits, perhaps made of hardened bronze or early iron, and an incredibly steady hand. The slightest deviation could create an internal burr or an uneven surface that would snag the sand. Metal, if cast, offers more potential for precision, as the hole could be part of the mold. However, casting such a fine detail flawlessly is still a challenge, and any finishing or drilling to refine the hole would need to be done with extreme care to avoid creating scratches or an irregular shape. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient metalworkers were capable of incredibly fine detail, as seen in jewelry and small decorative objects. Techniques like lost wax casting allowed for intricate shapes, but applying this to the inside of a narrow, functional passage is a different order of complexity. This is where glass, once the technique of forming a single-piece hourglass was developed, truly shines. As the glassblower constricts the molten glass to form the neck, they have a dynamic, albeit challenging, opportunity to control its diameter. It's not about drilling or carving after the fact, it's about shaping it correctly in its fluid state. The skill involved is immense. Too much heat or too forceful a constriction, and the passage might close entirely or become too narrow. Too little, and it remains too wide. The glassblower would rely on experience, visual judgment, and perhaps even the feel of the resistance in the blowpipe to gauge the neck's formation. It's a process that's part art, part science, and a healthy dose of practiced intuition. And it's not just the diameter, but the shape of the neck's interior that matters. Is it a sharp-edged orifice, or does it have a slight rounding, a gentle chamfer, to ease the sand's entry and exit? A sharp edge might be more prone to wear or chipping over long periods of use, subtly altering the flow rate over time. A very slight, smooth rounding could improve flow consistency. This is a level of microengineering that ancient artisans would have discovered through painstaking trial, error, and observation. One quirky tidbit often debated among horological historians is whether any kind of insert was ever used for the neck in early hourglasses, especially those made of less durable materials like pottery or wood. Could a tiny, precisely made tube of bone, ivory, or even a harder stone or a small piece of metal be set into the neck to provide a more durable and consistently sized aperture? While direct archaeological evidence for this in sand timers is sparse, the principle of using harder, more wear-resistant materials for critical parts was well understood in other ancient technologies, like using stone bearings in early drills. Historians still argue whether the final adjustment of the neck's diameter, in non-glass hourglasses, might have been achieved by methods other than simple drilling or carving. Could there have been techniques involving fine abrasive powders, worked back and forth through the passage with a cord or a thin rod, to gradually enlarge and smooth the opening to the exact desired dimension? Such lapping techniques were known for polishing beads and other small objects. It's a slow, meticulous process, but it offers a high degree of control. You can imagine the artisan, holding the nearly completed hourglass body up to the light, squinting through the tiny passage. They might use a fine bristle or a strand of silk to gauge its evenness. They would understand that this tiny tunnel is the gatekeeper of accuracy. They might make several attempts, several different vessels, before achieving one with a neck that seems promising. Each failure is a lesson, each slightly imperfect hole a guide towards the ideal. The precision required here is almost counterintuitive for a device that seems so simple. You're not building a grand waterlifting screw or a siege engine. You're fussing over a hole that might be no wider than a couple of your perfect sand grains laid side by side. But it's this microscopic attention to detail that elevates the hourglass from a mere novelty to a functional instrument. The flow rate of sand through an orifice is governed by complex physics. The Beverley equation, though centuries from being formulated, describes some of these granular flow principles. But what it boils down to for you, the ancient craftsman, is that the size and shape of this one tiny point will dictate everything. The challenge is compounded by the fact that, unlike a water clock where you might be able to adjust the flow slightly by, say, fiddling with a valve, if you had a very advanced one, with a sealed hourglass, the neck is fixed. Once the sand is in and the vessel is sealed, that's it. Any error in the next dimension is permanent. So the pressure to get it right from the start, is immense. The narrow passage is where all your skill, all your patience, and all your understanding of materials converge into one critical point of creation. It's the eye of the needle, both literally and figuratively, for your ambitions of precise timekeeping. You've done it. You've prepared your exquisite sand, a cascade of uniform perfection. You've crafted a vessel, perhaps even a beautiful glass one, with a neck that appears, to your keen eye, to be just the right dimension. The moment of truth, or rather, the many, many moments of truth, has arrived. Calibration. This is the endless adjustments phase, a period of painstaking, iterative tinkering that will test your patience more than any other stage. It's where theory meets reality, and where you discover just how finely tuned this seemingly simple device needs to be. You carefully measure out a specific quantity of your prepared sand. How much? Well, that depends on the duration you're aiming for. An hour? Half an hour? 15 minutes? Let's say you're aiming for a classic 1-hour timer. You have a rough idea of the volume of sand required, perhaps based on previous, less successful experiments, or maybe just an educated guess. You pour this sand into one of the bulbs of your hourglass. Then, you seal it. This sealing process itself is crucial. If it's a glass hourglass, the final sealing of the filling hole, often a small opening left in one of the bulbs, would be done with a flame, melting the glass to create a permanent, airtight closure. If it's pottery or wood, you'd need a very secure plug, perhaps made of wax, resin, or a tightly fitted piece of cork or wood, ensuring no sand can escape and, importantly, no moisture can get in. Remember the battle against humidity? A poor seal renders all that careful drying moot. Now, the first run. You carefully invert the hourglass and place it on a perfectly level surface. You need a reference timer, something to measure against. This is a challenge in itself in an era before readily available, accurate clocks. Perhaps you're using a well-calibrated water clock. Despite its flaws, a good one could be a reference for shorter periods if meticulously maintained. Or maybe you're doing this during the day and using a gnomon or a simple sundial, trying to mark the passage of a specific fraction of daylight. It's a mainstream historical fact that sundials, in various forms, were among the earliest scientific instruments and provided the primary time standard for centuries. Your task is to make your sand timer agree with one of these established, albeit imperfect, methods. You watch the sand begin to flow. That first cascade is always a moment of anticipation. Is the neck too wide? Too narrow? The sand streams down, forming a neat little cone in the lower bulb. You wait. And wait. This is not a quick process. If you're aiming for an hour, you have an hour of observation ahead of you, at least for this first trial. You might mark the starting point on your reference timer, and then you watch, trying to resist the urge to tap the hourglass or otherwise interfere with it. Let's say your reference, perhaps a marked candle, or a section of a long, slow-burning incense stick whose rate you've painstakingly averaged over many burns, indicates that an hour has passed. You look at your hourglass. Is all the sand in the bottom bulb? Or is there still a significant amount left in the top? Or, did it run out far too soon? Scenario 1. The sand runs out too quickly. Your hourglass is actually a 45-minute glass. This means your neck is too wide, or you didn't put enough sand in. If you're certain the neck itself isn't grossly oversized, which you would have tried to avoid in the crafting stage, the primary adjustment here is the quantity of sand. You'll have to carefully unseal your hourglass, a delicate process if it's flame-sealed glass, potentially requiring you to break and remake the seal, remove a small, measured amount of sand, reseal it, and try again. This is where having an accurate way to measure small quantities of sand, perhaps by volume using a tiny scoop, or even by weight if you have a sensitive enough balance, becomes critical. Scenario 2. The sand is still flowing when your reference hour is up. Your hourglass is too slow. This means the neck might be a fraction too narrow, or you've put in too much sand. If it's too much sand, the adjustment is similar to scenario 1, but you're adding sand. But what if the neck itself is the culprit, constricting the flow too much? If you're working with a glass hourglass, significantly altering the neck after it's formed and sealed is virtually impossible without completely remaking the vessel. This is why getting the neck right during the glassblowing phase is so paramount. If it's a pottery or wooden hourglass, you might be able to very carefully, painstakingly, use an ultrafine abrasive to slightly enlarge the orifice, but this is risky. You could easily overdo it or damage the smoothness. One quirky tidbit is that some old tales describe clockmakers having master hourglasses of known accuracy, which they would use to calibrate new ones, essentially timing the new hourglass against the proven one. This assumes, of course, the existence of that first perfectly calibrated master. This iterative process of unsealing, adjusting sand quantity, resealing, and retesting goes on, and on, and on. Each adjustment is small, because you're aiming for precision. You might spend days, even weeks, on a single hourglass. You keep meticulous records of each trial, how much sand, the ambient conditions, just in case extreme temperature or humidity still has some subtle, unexpected effect you haven't accounted for, and the resulting run time. You become intimately familiar with the personality of this particular hourglass. Historians still argue whether there were standardized recipes for hourglass calibration in certain workshops. For instance, for a 1-hour glass of this specific bulb volume and this specific neck template, use precisely X measures of our standard grade A sand. Such standardization would certainly improve efficiency if a workshop were producing multiple hourglasses, but it would still require an initial, incredibly rigorous calibration of that first template design and the standard sand. You're not just calibrating for one run, either. You need to check for consistency. Does it run for 60 minutes the first time, but 58 the next, and 62 after that? If so, something is still wrong. Perhaps there's a microscopic burr in the neck that catches sand intermittently. Or maybe the internal surfaces aren't as smooth as you thought, and the sand's packing density changes slightly with each turn. You flip it, time it, flip it again, time it again. You're looking for that reassuring consistency, run after run. You might even have a little joke with yourself. Is this hourglass testing my patience, or am I testing its precision? It feels like a bit of both. This phase is less about dramatic breakthroughs and more about relentless refinement. It's the quiet, unglamorous work that separates a functional timekeeper from a mere curiosity. The satisfaction comes not from a single brilliant idea, but from the cumulative effect of many tiny, careful adjustments, finally coaxing this beautiful object into a reliable servant of time. The endless adjustments are a testament to the dedication required to make sand flow not just freely, but precisely on schedule. Your meticulously calibrated hourglass, born from perfect grains, a precisely crafted vessel, a flawlessly engineered neck, and countless hours of patient adjustment, is now ready to take its place in the world. And in ancient China, particularly during influential periods like the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, such devices, though perhaps not always as refined as your idealized creation, found their niche. The Han Dynasty was a period of significant technological advancement and consolidation in China, an era that saw innovations in papermaking, the seismograph, and, yes, improvements in timekeeping. While water clocks, or clepsydras, remained prominent, the specific advantages of sand timers in certain situations would have been increasingly recognized. Imagine your hourglass, perhaps a handsome creation of dark, polished wood framing 2 clear glass bulbs, or a sturdy ceramic piece, finding its way into a government office in Chang'an, the bustling Han capital. Officials, tasked with managing the complex affairs of a vast empire, needed to regulate their work. While the grand imperial water clocks might mark the major divisions of the day and night for the entire palace or city, a smaller, portable sand timer could be invaluable for shorter, specific tasks within an office. Perhaps it's used to time the duration allowed for a petitioner to present their case, or to regulate breaks for scribes and clerks. A 1-hour or half-hour sand timer on a scholar official's desk would be a constant, silent reminder of the passage of time and the need for diligence. This is a very practical application, far from the grand celestial observations, but crucial for the day-to-day functioning of a bureaucracy. It's a historical fact that the Han Dynasty placed great emphasis on order, record-keeping, and efficient administration. Standardized systems were key to managing their territory and population. While we don't have as many explicit textual references to sand hourglasses from the Han period as we do for water clocks, the logical utility of such devices, especially for convenience and portability where water might be impractical, suggests they would have been developed and used. Remember those problematic water clocks? An official wouldn't want one dripping all over important documents or requiring constant refilling in a busy office. A sealed sand timer bypasses these issues entirely. The military was another area where sand timers could have proven useful. Imagine a Han Dynasty general planning a night maneuver or needing to coordinate the timing of sentry watches. A reliable sand timer, unaffected by the cold of a northern frontier night, unlike a water clock that might freeze, and requiring no light to read, unlike a sundial, would be a significant asset. Soldiers could be issued smaller, robustly made sand timers to ensure guard duties were performed for the correct duration, or to time the intervals between signals. The simplicity and resilience of a well-made sand timer would be highly valued in such demanding conditions. Beyond official and military use, there's also the realm of scholarship and personal study. Han Dynasty scholars were renowned for their dedication to learning and the meticulous study of classical texts. A sand timer could help an individual manage their study sessions, ensuring they devoted sufficient time to different subjects or tasks. Picture a scholar in their quiet study, a single lamp illuminating scrolls of bamboo slips or early paper, with a sand timer faithfully marking the passage of an hour of focused concentration. It becomes a companion in their intellectual pursuits, a silent disciplinarian. One quirky tidbit is that some theories suggest that the development of sand-like granular materials for other purposes might have spurred innovation in sand timers. For instance, the Han Dynasty saw advancements in metallurgy and the production of various powders and refined substances for alchemy or medicine. Working with these fine, dry materials might have given artisans insights into how to prepare and handle sand for timekeeping. It's a kind of cross-pollination of technologies. Experience gained in one field inadvertently benefits another. Perhaps an alchemist, used to carefully measuring powdered cinnabar or sulfur, realized that similar principles could apply to making sand flow predictably. Historians still argue about the precise extent and sophistication of Han Dynasty sand hourglasses. Were they mostly simple, functional devices, or did highly accurate, finely crafted versions exist, perhaps even rivaling the precision of the best water clocks for certain applications? The archaeological record for such delicate objects is sparse. Glass and even well-made ceramics or wood can be fragile over 2 millennia. However, given the overall technological capabilities of the Han era, it's plausible that sophisticated sand timers were indeed part of their timekeeping toolkit, even if they weren't as monumental or as frequently lauded in texts as the grand imperial clepsydras. Consider also the use in specific crafts or industrial processes that might have emerged or been refined during this period. Perhaps certain dyeing processes, lacquer application, or even the timing of fermentation for foods and beverages could benefit from a simple, reliable timer that wasn't dependent on sunlight or complex mechanisms. An artisan could set a half-hour sand timer and know, with reasonable accuracy, when to move to the next step of their work. The design of these Han Dynasty hourglasses would likely have reflected the aesthetic sensibilities of the time. Even functional objects were often imbued with a sense of balance and form. A wooden frame might be elegantly carved with subtle patterns. A ceramic hourglass might feature a simple, pleasing glaze. The emphasis would be on functionality, but not necessarily at the complete expense of beauty, especially for an item that might be visible in an official's office or a scholar's study. Your creation, therefore, fits into a context of a society that valued order, precision in administration, and scholarly pursuit. It's not just a curiosity, it's a tool that serves real needs. The quiet whisper of sand falling in a Han Dynasty hourglass would have been the subtle soundtrack to countless acts of governance, military discipline, scholarly endeavor, and skilled craftsmanship, a testament to the quiet but persistent utility of this elegant timekeeping solution. The legacy of Han innovation provided a fertile ground for such practical technologies to take root and evolve. Your precisely calibrated hourglass, having found its place in the bustling world of Han Dynasty officialdom or the quietude of a scholar's study, also ascends to the loftiest echelons of society, the imperial court. Here, within the forbidden city's ancient precursors, or the grand palaces of emperors, the precise timing of events was not merely a matter of efficiency, but of ritual, power, and cosmic harmony. The emperor, the son of heaven, lived a life governed by intricate schedules, and your humble sand timer, in its most refined and perhaps extravagantly presented form, played its part in orchestrating these imperial rhythms. Imagine the grand imperial audience hall. Officials, in their prescribed robes, await the emperor's arrival. The exact moment of his appearance, the duration of the audience, the timing of specific pronouncements, these are all carefully managed. While the massive imperial water clocks, often complex bronze automatons adorned with dragons and phoenixes, would mark the major divisions of the day for the entire palace complex, smaller, more specialized timers would be needed for specific ceremonies or procedures within these larger blocks of time. A sand hourglass, perhaps one crafted with a frame of jade or precious hardwood, inlaid with gold or silver, holding sand made from crushed pearls or gemstones, a flight of fancy, perhaps, but emperors were known for their luxurious tastes, could be used by a court chamberlain to discreetly time a segment of a ritual or the allotted period for a specific tribute presentation. It's a historical fact that Chinese imperial courts, across many dynasties, were deeply concerned with omens, astrology, and the auspicious timing of events. The Bureau of Astronomy and Calendar was a vital institution, responsible for maintaining the official calendar, predicting celestial events, and advising the emperor on propitious times for important actions, from starting a military campaign to conducting a sacrificial rite. While these officials relied primarily on astronomical observations and complex calculations, along with sophisticated armillary spheres and sighting tubes, the actual execution of a timed ritual on the ground might still benefit from a reliable, immediate timer like an hourglass. Suppose the imperial astrologer determines that a specific offering must be made for precisely 1 ku, a traditional Chinese unit of time, roughly 14.4 minutes in later standardizations, though it varied. An hourglass designed to run for exactly 1 ku would be invaluable to the master of ceremonies. Think of the elaborate imperial banquets, with their multiple courses and precisely timed entertainments. An hourglass could be used by the chief eunuch or palace steward to signal the kitchens when to send forth the next dish, or to cue the musicians and dancers. This ensures a smooth, dignified flow to the proceedings, befitting the emperor's majesty. There's a certain theatricality to court life, and like any good stage production, timing is everything. You wouldn't want the shark's fin soup arriving before the roasted pheasant has been properly appreciated, would you? A culinary faux pas of imperial proportions. Consider also the emperor's personal routine. His study periods, his consultations with ministers, even his leisure activities might be structured by time. A discreet hourglass on his desk, perhaps a gift from a skilled artisan or a foreign tributary, could serve as a personal reminder. It's less obtrusive than a constantly gurgling water clock and more elegant than a simple stick of incense for an emperor concerned with refinement. One quirky tidbit relates to the symbolic power of such objects. An hourglass, visibly measuring the finite resource of time, could serve as a memento mori even for an emperor, a reminder of the transient nature of power and life, encouraging wise and timely governance. Or, conversely, it could symbolize the emperor's control over time, his ability to order and regulate the affairs of the empire down to the minute. The symbolism could be read in multiple ways, depending on the context and the emperor's own inclinations. Historians still argue about the degree to which emperors personally interacted with or relied upon smaller timekeeping devices like hourglasses, versus leaving such matters entirely to their household staff and court officials. Some emperors were known for their keen interest in science and mechanics, while others were more focused on statecraft or the arts. An emperor like Wang Mang, who briefly interrupted the Han Dynasty with his Han Dynasty, a meticulous reformer obsessed with ancient rites and measures, might have taken a very direct interest in the accuracy and symbolism of the timekeeping devices used in his court. The materials and craftsmanship of an imperial hourglass would, of course, be of the highest order. If glass was used, it would be the clearest, most flawless available. The sand, as mentioned, might be specially selected for its color or perceived preciousness. The frame would be a work of art in itself, perhaps featuring carvings of dragons, phoenixes, or other auspicious symbols. It wouldn't just be a timer, it would be a treasure, an emblem of imperial precision and taste. Remember the meticulous preparation of your perfect grains? For an imperial commission, that process would be elevated to an art form, perhaps with closely guarded secret techniques for sand refinement. The use of these timers would extend to important state ceremonies. The investiture of a new official, the seasonal sacrifices at the Temple of Heaven, the reception of foreign ambassadors, all these events were highly choreographed, with specific durations for each part of the ceremony. An hourglass, perhaps a series of them for different intervals, could help the ritual specialists ensure that everything proceeded according to ancient protocol and auspicious timing. The rhythmic fall of sand, almost silent, would underscore the solemnity and order of these imperial duties. The emperor's world was one where every gesture, every moment, could be imbued with significance, and the humble hourglass, in its most exalted form, helped to structure and sanctify that imperial rhythm. With your hourglasses now gracing imperial courts, government offices, and scholarly desks, the question of consistency and reliability across different devices becomes more pressing. If an official in one province uses an hourglass that runs significantly faster or slower than one used by an official in another, confusion and inefficiency can arise, especially when coordinating actions or interpreting reports that reference timed intervals. This leads us to the concept of guarding the standards, the societal or official efforts, however nascent or informal, aimed at standardizing and maintaining the accuracy of these timekeeping instruments. You can't just have any old tinkerer declaring their lopsided sand timer to be the new official hour. While a formal Bureau of Hourglass Standards might be an anachronism for the Han Dynasty or even somewhat later periods, the underlying principle of ensuring consistency in measurements was certainly present in ancient Chinese governance. It's a historical fact that the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, famously standardized weights, measures, and even the axle widths of carts across his newly unified empire. This drive for standardization was a cornerstone of centralized imperial power and efficient administration. It's logical to assume that as timekeeping devices became more integral to governance and societal functions, some attention would be paid to their accuracy, even if it wasn't through a highly formalized, modern-style metrology institute. Imagine a master artisan, perhaps someone like yourself who has dedicated years to perfecting the art of hourglass construction and calibration. Their workshop might become known for producing exceptionally accurate timers. Officials or wealthy patrons seeking reliable hourglasses would specifically seek out this master craftsman or their apprentices. This reputation itself acts as a form of quality control. If a craftsman consistently produces shoddy, inaccurate timers, word will get around, and their business will suffer. Conversely, excellence is rewarded. This is a market-driven form of standardization, relying on reputation and discerning customers. In a more official capacity, a high-ranking official within the imperial household or the Bureau of Astronomy, the very people responsible for the grand imperial clepsydras, might take an interest in ensuring that any hourglasses used for official purposes met a certain minimum standard. They might commission a set of master hourglasses, calibrated with extreme care against the primary imperial water clocks or astronomical observations. These master hourglasses could then serve as references. Perhaps when a new batch of hourglasses is procured for government use, a sample is tested against one of these master timers. If it deviates too much, the batch might be rejected, or the supplier admonished. This is a step towards more centralized quality control. Consider the role of guilds or associations of craftsmen, if such existed in a formal way for hourglass makers, which is speculative. Craftsmen in similar trades often shared knowledge, established standards of workmanship, and trained apprentices. Within such a group, there might be an internal pressure to uphold the quality of their products to maintain the reputation of the craft as a whole. A poorly made hourglass from one workshop could reflect badly on all hourglass makers. This kind of peer-enforced standard, while informal, can be quite effective. You wouldn't want to be the artisan known for the hourglass that tells lies, would you? One quirky tidbit could be the idea of traveling inspectors or calibrators. While perhaps more common for weights and measures used in marketplaces, it's conceivable that for particularly important applications, an expert might be dispatched from the capital to check or adjust critical timekeeping devices in provincial offices. Or, conversely, provincial officials might be required to send their hourglasses to a central workshop periodically for verification and recalibration, much like modern scientific instruments are sent for certification. This is more speculative for hourglasses, but the principle of periodic verification of standards was not unknown. Historians still argue whether there were specific written codes or regulations pertaining to the manufacture and accuracy of lesser timekeeping devices like sand hourglasses in ancient China, similar to the detailed regulations that sometimes existed for weights or measures. Such texts, if they existed, may not have survived, or the regulation might have been more by custom and precedent than by explicit legal decree. The emphasis was often on the result. Did the official complete their tasks in a timely manner? Rather than on the minute regulation of every tool they used, unless a clear problem arose from faulty instruments. The process of guarding the standards also involves the transmission of knowledge. How did an apprentice learn to calibrate an hourglass correctly? They learned by watching the master, through hands-on practice, through countless repetitions of that endless adjustments phase we discussed earlier. The master would impart the subtle tricks of the trade, how to judge the quality of the sand by feel, how to spot a flaw in the glass neck, the precise technique for sealing the vessel. This oral tradition and direct apprenticeship was the primary way skills and standards were maintained and passed down through generations. Your own journey of discovery, from struggling with lumpy river sand to mastering the art of the perfect grain and the precisely calibrated flow, would become the knowledge you pass to your own apprentice. Furthermore, the users themselves played a role. An experienced official or scholar who relied on an hourglass daily would develop a feel for its accuracy. If their trusted hourglass suddenly started running fast or slow, they'd notice. They might then seek to have it repaired or replaced. This user feedback loop, though informal, also contributes to maintaining a certain level of quality. Guarding the standards wasn't necessarily about legions of inspectors with clipboards. It was more of an ecosystem of skilled craftsmanship, reputational pressures, occasional official oversight for critical applications, and the practical experience of users. It was about ensuring that when an hourglass said an hour had passed, it was an hour that most other reliable timers would agree with, at least closely enough for the practical purposes of the time. The quiet authority of a well-made, accurately calibrated hourglass rested on this often unseen framework of maintained skill and expectation. While emperors and high officials were benefiting from your exquisitely crafted, precisely calibrated hourglasses, what about the common people? Did the rhythmic whisper of falling sand also mark time in the more humble spheres of daily life in ancient China? It's unlikely that the average farmer or street vendor would possess a delicate glass hourglass with a jade frame, but the principle of using flowing granular material to mark shorter intervals could certainly have found its way into everyday practice, albeit in cruder, more approximate forms. The carefully guarded standards of the imperial court would give way to the practical needs and available materials of the populace. Imagine a village cook, needing to boil medicinal herbs for a specific, though not split-second precise, duration. She might not have access to your perfectly sifted, gem-like sand, nor a blown glass vessel. But she might have a simple earthenware pot with a small hole drilled in the bottom, and she might use fine, dry earth or millet seeds, sieved through a coarse cloth, as her timing medium. Her timer might not be accurate to the minute, but it would be consistent enough for her needs. 2 runs of the little pot might be her recipe's instruction. This is timekeeping born of necessity and ingenuity, using what's at hand. Remember your own early struggles with imperfect sand and simple vessels? The village cook is essentially at that stage, but her needs are different. Good enough is perfectly acceptable. It's a historical fact that many folk technologies and agricultural practices relied on approximate time markers. The position of the sun was, of course, primary for longer durations. But for shorter tasks, how long to let dough rise in a warm spot, how long to steep tea leaves for the best flavor, or how long to fire pottery in a small kiln, a simple, homemade sand or grain timer could be very useful. These wouldn't be hourglasses in the elegant sense, but functional sand pourers or grain drippers. Consider a marketplace. A vendor selling a hot snack, like steamed buns, might use a simple timer to know when a batch is ready. Or a street performer, juggling or telling stories, might use a small, rough timer to gauge the length of their act, ensuring they don't overstay their welcome in one spot or shortchange their audience. These devices would need to be robust, cheap, and easily replaceable. A couple of dried gourds, one with a hole, a bit of readily available sand, voila, a functional timer. Not something to impress an emperor, but perfectly adequate for ensuring the next batch of sweet dumplings isn't burnt. One quirky tidbit is the use of singing sands or whistling sands in some desert regions. While not directly related to timekeeping, the fascination with the sounds produced by moving sand under certain conditions shows a deep cultural awareness of sand's properties. It's a small leap to imagine someone, familiar with sand's ability to flow and even speak, thinking of harnessing its flow for other purposes, like marking time, even if the result is a simple, unadorned device. The very tactile and auditory nature of flowing sand, the soft hiss, the visual depletion and accumulation, makes it an intuitive medium. Historians still argue about how widespread such rudimentary timekeeping devices were among the general populace. Because they were often made of perishable materials and were not considered high-status objects, they are far less likely to survive in the archaeological record than, say, bronze ritual vessels or jade ornaments. Their existence is often inferred from the practical needs of daily life and the general human tendency to create tools to solve everyday problems. We see evidence of common folk adapting other technologies, simple levers, basic pottery techniques, food preservation methods, so it's reasonable to assume similar ingenuity was applied to timekeeping when needed. You might see children playing, using a leaky coconut shell filled with sand to time their races or games. First one back before the sand runs out. This playful use of the principle is often how basic scientific concepts are first encountered and understood. It's not formal science, but it's an intuitive grasp of regular, measurable flow. In a small rural monastery, monks might use a larger, but still relatively simple, sand timer to mark periods for meditation or chanting, especially during overcast days or at night when sun and water clocks might be less convenient or too distracting. Their needs are for consistency and a gentle reminder, not necessarily for the absolute precision required for imperial astronomical calculations. The soft sound of the sand might even be considered conducive to a meditative atmosphere, unlike the sometimes startling gongs or drums of more elaborate temple clocks. The sand used in these everyday timers would be whatever was locally available and reasonably clean and dry. There would be no laborious sifting through multiple grades of silk sieves or careful washing and polishing as you performed for your high-end models. The calibration would be equally pragmatic. Fill it to this mark, and it runs for about as long as it takes to walk to the well and back. It's a kind of embodied, experiential timekeeping. So, while your sophisticated hourglasses are timing imperial decrees and scholarly pursuits, the fundamental idea of sans whispers marking time is democratized, adapted, and simplified to serve the rhythms of ordinary life. It's a testament to the versatility of the core concept. The precise, elegant fall of your perfect grains in a clear glass vessel has its rustic cousins, the rougher trickle of common sand in an earthenware pot, the swish of millet seeds in a dried gourd, each playing its own small part in helping people navigate their day, cook their meals, and perhaps even time their children's games. The essence of the invention, the controlled flow, echoes even in these most humble applications. Your hourglass, whether it's an imperial masterpiece or a simpler but still accurately calibrated version, typically measures a set duration, an hour, half an hour, perhaps 1 coup. But what if you need to measure shorter, more specific intervals within that larger span of time? What if a physician needs to administer a medicine every 7 minutes, or an alchemist needs to heat a concoction for precisely 3 minutes, then cool it for 5? Simply watching the sand level drop and guessing isn't precise enough for such tasks. This need leads to innovations in subdividing the flow, adapting the hourglass to become a more versatile instrument for measuring these smaller, discrete portions of time. One of the simplest ways to achieve this is by adding markings to the outside of the glass bulbs. Once your hourglass is perfectly calibrated to run for, say, 60 minutes, you can then conduct further timed runs to mark off shorter intervals. For example, you could run it alongside another timer, perhaps a very short-duration water clock or even a pendulum, if such rudimentary forms were being experimented with, and make a fine scratch or paint a thin line on the glass bulb at the point the sand level reaches after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and so on. This is a direct visual cue. Now, the user can see not just when the full hour is up, but also when these intermediate points are reached. This transforms the hourglass from a single-interval timer into a multi-interval one. It's a historical fact that graduated markings were used on inflow water clocks, clepsydras, to show the passage of multiple units of time as the water level rose. Applying a similar principle to the falling sand in an hourglass is a logical extension. Of course, there's a slight complication. The sand in the upper bulb typically forms a concave surface as it drains, a meniscus, though usually applied to liquids. The concept of a curved surface is similar, and in the lower bulb, it forms a cone. The rate at which the level of the sand appears to drop in the upper bulb isn't perfectly linear, especially if the bulbs are not perfectly cylindrical but are more rounded or pear-shaped. The volume of sand flowing per minute is constant. That's the whole point of your careful calibration. But how that constant volume translates to a visible change in height can vary depending on the bulb's shape at that particular point. So, these markings would need to be empirically determined for each individual hourglass. You couldn't just divide the bulb height into equal segments and assume each represented an equal fraction of time. This requires yet another layer of patient calibration for each desired subdivision. Another approach involves creating sets of smaller, dedicated hourglasses. Instead of one large 1-hour glass with multiple markings, you might have a set, a 1-minute timer, a 5-minute timer, a 10-minute timer. Each of these would be individually crafted and calibrated for its specific duration. A physician might have a small wooden case containing several such mini hourglasses, ready for various diagnostic or treatment timings. This is similar to how a chef today might have a set of measuring spoons rather than trying to estimate fractions from a single large cup. This approach trades the convenience of a single multi-mark device for the potentially greater accuracy of multiple dedicated timers, each optimized for its specific, shorter run time. A more complex, and perhaps rarer, innovation would be the multi-chambered hourglass. Imagine an hourglass with not just 2 bulbs, but 3 or even 4, stacked vertically, with precisely calibrated necks between each chamber. The sand would flow from the top chamber to the second, then from the second to the third, and so on. If the necks were sized differently, or the chambers held different initial volumes of sand, such a device could potentially signal several different time intervals in sequence. For instance, the emptying of the first chamber might mark 5 minutes, the second an additional 10, and the third a further 15. This is venturing into more complex glassblowing and calibration. One quirky tidbit: some fanciful medieval European illustrations depict incredibly elaborate, almost fantastical multi-bulbed hourglasses, though it's debatable how practical or widespread such intricate devices truly were. Their existence in illustration, however, shows that people were certainly thinking about ways to get more complex timing from a single device. Historians still argue about the commonality and practicality of these subdividing techniques, especially the more complex multi-chambered ones, in ancient China. While the Chinese were certainly capable of sophisticated craftsmanship, as seen in their complex bronze casting and lacquerware, the inherent difficulty of perfectly calibrating multiple sequential flows in a sand timer might have limited the widespread adoption of very complex forms. Simple external markings on a standard 2-bulb hourglass, or sets of smaller, single-interval timers, were likely the more common solutions for measuring shorter durations. The need for subdivided time wasn't just for esoteric pursuits. In a busy workshop, different stages of a craft might require different short timings. In a school, a teacher might use a smaller hourglass to time exercises or recitations. Even in the kitchen, beyond the village cook's rough timer, a more precise household might use a 5-minute sand timer for brewing the perfect cup of tea, a practice that has echoes even today with modern tea timers. Remember the imperial banquets? The coordination of those events might involve not just hour-long timers, but smaller ones to ensure the musicians didn't play one piece for too long, or that the acrobat's performance hit its allotted slot precisely. The challenge in all these methods is maintaining accuracy at smaller scales. Any slight inconsistency in the sand flow, which might average out over an hour, becomes much more significant when you're trying to measure just 1 or 2 minutes. The precision of the neck, the uniformity of the sand, and the smoothness of the glass become even more critical. You, our master craftsman, would find that calibrating a reliable 1-minute hourglass can be just as, if not more, demanding than calibrating a 1-hour one, because the margin for error is so much smaller relative to the total duration. By marking, grouping, or even ingeniously stacking, you are essentially extracting more information, more utility, from the fundamental principle of falling sand. You're making your hourglass a more articulate interpreter of time's passage, capable of whispering not just the hour, but the many crucial minutes that make it up. This desire to break down time into ever smaller, more manageable pieces is a constant theme in the history of horology, and the hourglass, in its own way, participated in this ongoing quest for finer temporal resolution. Your hourglass, now a marvel of precise engineering and careful calibration, capable of marking not just the grand sweep of an hour but also its constituent minutes, begins to transcend its purely functional role. It evolves beyond a mere tool and seeps into the cultural consciousness, acquiring layers of symbolic meaning and finding representation in art and philosophy. The steady, silent cascade of sand from one bulb to another becomes a potent visual metaphor for concepts far grander than just telling you when your coup is up. In ancient China, with its rich philosophical traditions and sophisticated artistic expression, the hourglass, or at least the concept it embodies, would not have remained a purely utilitarian object for long. The most obvious symbolism, of course, is the passage of time itself. The finite quantity of sand in the upper bulb visibly diminishes, a constant reminder that time is running out, that moments are fleeting. This is a universal understanding, but in a culture like traditional China, with its emphasis on lineage, history, and the cyclical nature of events, This visual representation of time's flow would have resonated deeply. It's a historical fact that Taoist philosophy, for example, often contemplates the natural flow of existence, the Tao or way, and the hourglass, with its effortless, gravity-driven movement, could be seen as a miniature embodiment of this natural, inevitable process. The sand doesn't struggle, it simply flows according to its nature, just as events unfold in the grander scheme of the cosmos. In art, while direct depictions of sand hourglasses in very early Chinese paintings or sculptures might be less common than, say, symbols like the dragon or the phoenix, the idea of measured time and its ephemeral nature certainly appears. You might find it subtly hinted at in a scholar's contemplative gaze in a portrait, the understanding that his moments for study and reflection are precious. Or perhaps in landscape paintings that evoke the changing seasons, another, grander kind of natural clock. When hourglasses do start to appear more explicitly in later art, often influenced by increased contact with other cultures where the hourglass motif became prominent, they carry this inherent weight of meaning. Consider the Buddhist influence in China, which grew significantly during and after the Han Dynasty. A core Buddhist concept is anicca, or impermanence, the idea that all conditioned things are in a constant state of flux. What better visual representation of impermanence than the sand hourglass? Each grain that falls is a moment past, never to be recovered. The entire device is a meditation on transience. Monks, as we discussed, might have used actual sand timers for meditation periods. The very sight of the falling sand could have served as a focus for contemplating this fundamental truth. You can almost hear a Zen master cryptically remarking, "The top bulb is not empty, the bottom bulb is not full. Where is the sand?" Prompting a deeper reflection on the nature of reality and time. The hourglass also embodies a sense of balance and duality. The two symmetrical bulbs, one emptying while the other fills, represent interconnected opposites, past and future, emptiness and fullness, life and death. This resonates with the Chinese concept of yin and yang, the complementary forces that shape the universe. The narrow neck is the point of transition, the present moment where future becomes past. This elegant symmetry would have appealed to the Chinese aesthetic, which often values harmony and balance in design and philosophy. Remember the meticulous care you took in crafting those perfectly matched bulbs? That effort wasn't just for good sand flow, it inadvertently created a powerful symbolic form. One quirky tidbit is how the hourglass, by its very operation of being turned over to reset time, can also symbolize renewal and cycles. Unlike a candle that burns down once, or incense that turns to ash, the hourglass can be inverted, and the process begins anew. This cyclical aspect aligns well with Chinese cosmological views, which often saw time not as purely linear but as moving in great cycles. Dynasties rise and fall, seasons repeat, and the sand in the hourglass, too, can be set to flow again and again. It's a closed system, finite yet endlessly renewable within its own boundaries. Historians still argue about the specific interpretations and the prevalence of hourglass symbolism in different strata of ancient Chinese society. Was it primarily an elite symbol, discussed by philosophers and depicted in refined art for scholars and courtiers? Or did some of its more basic meanings, time's running out, filter down to the common populace, perhaps through proverbs or folk stories? It's likely a mix. The sophisticated philosophical interpretations might have been the domain of the educated, while the more visceral understanding of fleeting time would be accessible to all who saw the device in action. The device could also symbolize patience and the steady accumulation of effort. Each grain is tiny, seemingly insignificant, yet together they mark a significant duration. This could be a metaphor for scholarly work, for the practice of a craft, or for any long-term endeavor. Just as you patiently sifted countless grains to get your perfect sand, the hourglass itself demonstrates how small, consistent actions build up over time to achieve a result. The hourglass, therefore, is more than just a clever way to avoid the pitfalls of a dripping water clock. It becomes a miniature theater of time, playing out its drama of flow, depletion, and renewal. Its visual and mechanical simplicity allows for a surprising depth of symbolic interpretation, making it a fitting object for a culture that often sought profound meaning in the elegant interplay of form and function. The art it inspires might not always be a literal drawing of an hourglass, but the concepts it embodies, impermanence, balance, the value of the present moment, would subtly influence artistic and philosophical expression for centuries. Your elegant hourglass, a symbol of fleeting moments and a testament to meticulous craftsmanship, has served faithfully for centuries. It has timed imperial ceremonies, guided scholars in their studies, and perhaps even helped a village cook or two. But time, as your hourglass so eloquently demonstrates, waits for no technology. As human ingenuity continues its relentless march, new and eventually more precise ways of measuring its passage begin to emerge. The quiet rain of falling sand, like that of water before it, starts to face competition from the intricate dance of gears and springs, the dawn of mechanical marvels. The transition wasn't abrupt. For a long time, hourglasses and early mechanical clocks would have coexisted, each serving different purposes or catering to different levels of precision and affordability. Your sand timer, especially a well-made one, still holds advantages. It's relatively simple, requires no winding, though it does need turning, of course, isn't easily thrown off by motion, making it good for sea voyages, a niche where it excelled for centuries even after mechanical clocks appeared, and is generally silent. But the allure of a device that could, potentially, run for much longer periods without intervention, and could strike bells to announce the hour, was strong. The development of mechanical clocks was a gradual, international affair, with significant contributions from various cultures. In China, as early as the Song Dynasty, 960-1279 CE, truly astonishing astronomical clock towers were built. It's a historical fact that Su Song's magnificent clock tower, completed in 1092 CE, was a marvel of engineering. It was powered by a water wheel, so, still a link to the old clepsydra technology in a way, but featured an escapement mechanism, a key invention for mechanical timekeeping, that controlled the intermittent release of energy to move the clock forward in regular steps. This clock not only told time but also demonstrated astronomical movements. It was a colossal, complex machine, a far cry from your discreet, personal hourglass. These early monumental clocks, while incredibly impressive, were not something an individual could own or easily replicate. They were public works, symbols of imperial power and astronomical knowledge. Your hourglass still had a vital role for personal, portable timekeeping. However, the principles demonstrated by these massive machines, the use of gears, escapements, and falling weights, or later, springs, as power sources, began to trickle down into smaller, more accessible devices. You can imagine an artisan, perhaps a descendant of your own lineage of hourglass makers, hearing tales of these newfangled striking clocks or even seeing a rudimentary mechanical timepiece brought by a traveler from afar. At first, they might be skeptical. These mechanical contraptions are noisy, full of fiddly bits that can break or rust, and surely they can't match the silent, reliable elegance of perfectly flowing sand? And for a while, they'd be right. Early mechanical clocks were often less accurate than a good hourglass or a well-maintained water clock. They were prone to stopping, and their rate could be affected by temperature changes, which caused metal parts to expand or contract, and wear and tear on the gears. Remember your struggles with the hourglass neck? Mechanical clocks had a whole symphony of tiny parts that all needed to be perfectly made and adjusted. One quirky tidbit is that the very sound of early mechanical clocks, the loud ticking and clanging of bells, was initially considered a marvel, a sign of their lively, active nature, in contrast to the silent passage of sand. It was a novelty. Today, many of us prefer a silent clock, but in an age when such mechanisms were new, their audible presence was part of their appeal. It was as if the clock was shouting, "Look at me, I am measuring time." Historians still argue about the exact pace at which smaller, more affordable mechanical clocks began to displace hourglasses for everyday use in various parts of the world, including China. It was a slow process, spanning centuries. For a long time, the two technologies complemented each other. An hourglass might be used to check the accuracy of a mechanical clock, or vice versa. Or an hourglass might be used for specific short-term timing, like boiling an egg, a task for which small sand timers are still sold today, while the mechanical clock kept track of the broader passage of hours. The advantages of mechanical clocks, once they became more reliable and compact, were undeniable. They could run for longer periods, e.g., 24 hours or more on a single winding. They could be designed to strike hours or even quarter hours, and eventually, they could be made with greater and greater precision, incorporating innovations like the pendulum, popularized in Europe by Christian Huygens in the 17th century, though the principle was known earlier, and more refined escapements. Your craft of making hourglasses might slowly shift. Perhaps there's less demand for the high-precision, hour-long timers for official or scholarly use, as mechanical clocks take over those roles. But there might still be a market for specialized sand timers, very short-duration timers for kitchens or apothecaries, robust timers for use on ships, where the rocking motion would defeat early pendulum clocks, or perhaps decorative hourglasses valued more for their symbolic meaning or aesthetic appeal than for their absolute precision. You might find yourself making hourglasses that are more ornate, focusing on the beauty of the frame and the quality of the glass, as their primary function as society's best timekeeper begins to wane. The very skills you honed, meticulous attention to detail, understanding of materials, patience and calibration, are still valuable, but the technological landscape is changing. The future of precision timekeeping, it seems, lies not in the gentle, continuous flow of sand, but in the precisely controlled, intermittent motion of metal wheels and levers. The mechanical marvels, with their ticking hearts and chiming voices, are beginning to set a new rhythm for the world, a rhythm that will eventually lead to the hyper-accurate atomic clocks of our own era. Your beautiful hourglass, however, is not yet entirely obsolete. It's just finding its new, more specialized place in a world increasingly fascinated by the intricate dance of mechanics. And so, the mechanical clocks tick on, their intricate gears and springs relentlessly marking time with ever-increasing precision. The grand astronomical clock towers of the Song Dynasty gave way to smaller, more personal devices, and eventually, the world embraced the pendulum, the balance spring, and then the quartz crystal. Your craft, the painstaking creation of perfectly calibrated sand hourglasses, while perhaps not vanishing entirely, certainly recedes from the forefront of horological innovation. The demand for hourglasses as primary timekeepers dwindles. Yet, the legacy of the ancient hourglass, the echo of its silently falling sand, endures in ways more profound than mere utility. It has shaped our very perception of time, leaving an indelible mark on our language, our symbols, and our understanding of this fundamental dimension of existence. Even as you, the metaphorical descendant of that original Han Dynasty artisan, might see fewer orders for official minute-marking hourglasses, the image of the device itself remains potent. The phrase "the sands of time" is a powerful cliché for a reason. It instantly evokes the relentless, irreversible passage of moments. This linguistic legacy is a direct descendant of the visual power of the hourglass. When we say someone's time is running out, the unspoken image is often that of the diminishing sand in the upper bulb. It's a far more evocative and universally understood metaphor than, say, the mainspring is unwinding or the battery is depleting. This speaks to the intuitive, almost primal connection we have with that simple image of flowing grains. The hourglass continues to be a powerful symbol in art, literature, and philosophy, long after its peak as a functional timekeeper. It represents mortality, the fleeting nature of life, the importance of using one's allotted time wisely. Think of its appearance in allegorical paintings of Father Time, or as a memento mori on a scholar's desk in a Veneta's still life, reminding the viewer of the transience of worldly pursuits. This symbolic resonance is perhaps the hourglass's most enduring contribution. It's a historical fact that the hourglass became a standard attribute in depictions of temperance, one of the cardinal virtues, symbolizing moderation and the measured passage of time. Moreover, the very act of creating an hourglass, your meticulous quest for perfect grains, a flawless vessel, and a precisely engineered neck, instilled a deep appreciation for precision and patience. This mindset, this dedication to getting the tiny details right because they have a significant impact on the outcome, is a foundational principle of all scientific and technological advancement. The skills and understanding gained in trying to make sand flow predictably, dealing with granular physics, material properties, and precise measurement, were part of the intellectual toolkit that eventually led to more complex machines. Even if an hourglass maker didn't directly invent a mechanical clock, the culture of careful craftsmanship they fostered contributed to an environment where such innovations could arise. One quirky tidbit is the continued use of hourglasses in specific, niche contexts even in the modern world. You still see them used for timing games, for egg timers in kitchens, and sometimes in therapeutic settings for mindfulness exercises. There's a certain comfort and simplicity in their operation that digital timers lack. The silent, visual flow can be less jarring, more calming. Their enduring presence in these small corners of life shows that they still hold a certain appeal, a tactile and visual satisfaction. And, of course, they are popular as decorative items, their elegant form and symbolic weight making them attractive objects even if their timekeeping is purely ornamental. Historians still argue about the exact moment the hourglass transitioned from a primarily functional object to a primarily symbolic one. It was, of course, a gradual process, varying by region and application. But it's clear that even as mechanical clocks became dominant, the hourglass retained a powerful hold on the human imagination. It didn't just disappear, it transformed, its meaning deepening as its practical necessity lessened. The conceptual influence of the hourglass is also significant. It provided a clear, tangible model for understanding time as a divisible, measurable quantity that flows from a future state, sand in the top bulb, through a present, the neck, into a past state, sand in the bottom bulb. This linear, flowing model of time, while perhaps an oversimplification of its true physical nature, is deeply embedded in how we colloquially think and speak about it. Remember your early ponderings about capturing the intangible? The hourglass offered one of the first truly successful ways to make time feel tangible, contained, and observable. The echo of those fallen grains also reminds us of the patience and ingenuity of those who came before us. Your journey, from wrestling with damp, uneven river sand to crafting an instrument of imperial precision, mirrors humanity's broader quest to understand and master the natural world. Each perfectly sifted grain, each carefully blown glass bulb, was a small victory in that ongoing endeavor. The sands of time, as measured by your ancient Chinese hourglass, laid a foundation, both practical and conceptual, for all the timekeeping marvels that followed. The gentle whisper of its flow may have been largely superseded by louder ticks and beeps, but its silent wisdom continues to resonate. As we prepare to drift off, consider the profound simplicity of that ancient solution. In a world obsessed with ever more complex technology, there's a certain beauty in the hourglass's elegant reliance on gravity and granular flow. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective solutions are born from a deep understanding of simple principles, patiently applied. The gentle hiss of the last grains falling through that narrow passage signals not an end, but a continuity. The quest to understand and measure time, a thread woven through human history from the first sunrise observations to the atomic clocks of today, found a particularly graceful expression in the ancient hourglass. As you settle deeper into your comfort, imagine that soft, almost inaudible sound, a rhythmic whisper that has soothed and structured human activity for millennia. The cares of your day, much like the sand in the upper chamber, have slowly, steadily flowed away, leaving a sense of quiet accumulation, perhaps of peace, in their wake. The image of that ancient Chinese artisan, patiently sifting, meticulously shaping, endlessly adjusting, fades now into the soft darkness. Their dedication, their quiet pursuit of precision, becomes a gentle lullaby, a testament to the enduring human spirit of inquiry and creation. Let the story of their craft, the transformation of humble sand into a keeper of moments, remind you that even the grandest concepts often have the simplest, most elemental beginnings. The night deepens around you, a vast, unmeasured expanse, much like the time that stretched before those early innovators. But for you, now, it is a time for rest, for letting go. The meticulous timing of sand flow can cease its gentle insistence in your mind. Allow the darkness to be a comforting blanket, the silence a welcome stillness. Your own internal hourglass has been turned, and the sands are still, ready for a new day, but only after a period of profound, untroubled repose. Sleep now, and may your dreams be as peaceful and as smoothly flowing as perfectly prepared sand in a timeless vessel.